I literally have hackers that when I negotiate with them, they quote the HIPAA laws. They like, you have regulatory laws in your state, you have HIPAA laws. Like, this is not, for them, it's not a game, right? They want to get paid, and they will go to unbelievable extremes to make sure that they're paid for their efforts. So one of the best things that we do for our clients is give them clear visibility and transparency into every device, every firewall, and every person in their organization, and assign a risk score to them.
Hello and welcome back to Ali Off the Record. I'm your host, Ali Aramchin, and today's episode is one you definitely don't want to miss, especially if you've ever been worried about getting hacked or locked out of your system or waking up to a ransomware attack, which is one of the scariest things I think any of us as business owners could deal with. Joining me is Gary Salman, the CEO of Black Talon Security. Gary is one of the top names in cybersecurity. He built and sold his first tech company to a public firm. He helped pioneer early cloud-based healthcare systems and even spent nearly 2 decades in law enforcement. And so now he's focusing his team on how to defend your business, your practice against some of the most sophisticated cybersecurity threats out there. These are ideas, strategies that Fortune 1000 companies use to protect themselves that Gary has brought to you. In this episode, we're going to pull back the curtain on some real life breaches that actually happen to our doctors. We're going to talk about some ransomware attacks and then how you can protect your practice before you also end up becoming a victim of ransomware. I hope you enjoy this episode. We'll see you there. Hey, Gary, I'm so thrilled to have you here today. I've been looking forward to this podcast for a long time because, I mean, the reality is you're at the front lines of some of the biggest stories that we hear about cybersecurity and hackings and whatnot. So thanks for being here. We're excited to have you.
Yeah, my honor. Thank you so much for including me.
Yeah, of course. So I want to kind of start a little bit with your story, like a little bit just about Gary and how you got involved in cybersecurity. I don't think our audience really knows much about you. You're sort of in the, you're in this in go between world, right? You're not in the front lines. You're not, in the back. You're sort of in the shadows. So tell us a little bit about who you are and how you started the business.
Yeah. So I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. Started as a kid, various businesses. And when I got to college, I went to college for pre-med. My dad was an oral surgeon and I was on the track to become an oral surgeon as well. And after my freshman year of bio and chem, my dad came to me. He's like, "Hey, I need some software for my practice, and computers." I'm like, "Okay." I'm literally a sophomore in college, about to be.
So
we started looking
exactly like a dentist, by the way. It sounds exactly like what a dentist would say.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I got multiple little companies I'm running, lawnmower business, like all that fun stuff. And we started talking to my neighbor who was a big wig at IBM. And he's like, "Oh, Gary's good with computers. Here's a database programmer. Steve, why don't you just design the software, sketch it out and let Gary code it?" I'm like, "I don't know how to code." Yeah. So anyway, I spent the summer teaching myself how to code. I took all my dad's drawings and converted them into data entry screens and databases and things like that.
Wow, nice.
And after about a year, we actually had a functional software. And he ended up showing it to a bunch of his OMS colleagues. And they're like, "Steve, you're insane not to sell this thing. You've nailed it. This is exactly what every OMS practice needs." So I had a long discussion with my dad. And I was like, "Hey, what do you think about me switching my major?" And he was totally cool with it. So that's how it kind of all started. And by my senior year of college, I was supporting about 30 dental practices across the country from my off-campus house, helping them, with our software all by myself. And then, that actually became a very sizable company supporting thousands of OMS users across the US. And in 99, we started playing with the internet and playing with server-based computers, kind of like the precursor to what we call cloud now. And I told my head engineer, I'm like, we have all these cool servers running our software. Can't we just plug these into the internet and like let our clients access it? He's like, oh yeah, that's what the software actually allows you to do. So I kid you not, we go to our very largest client. They have about 20 OMS practices across the US. And we say to them, hey, we have this new idea. We want you guys to test it. So a bunch of the surgeons flew up to New York, sat down with us, looked at the technology. We actually set up a live demo and they're like, yeah, we want to do this. And we're like, okay, this is real. Like, this is actually going to happen. So we ended up building our own data center and spinning up a whole bunch of like super expensive Dell servers at the time.
Yeah.
And one thing just led to another. All of a sudden, practices all over the country are like, oh yeah, we don't want servers anymore. We just want to log into yours. And then around 2000, we did a little data check and we're like, we have over, 2 million patient records in our databases now. And what happens if they get hit with a cyber attack? Like, there was no ransomware back then. Like, that wasn't even a word. And we quickly realized, yeah, look, if these servers get hit and the data gets compromised or they're used to attack other servers across the country, we're going to have a major problem. So we started really heavily investing in cybersecurity solutions. And at the time, like, Cisco was the primary player. And we bought a brand new state-of-the-art system that was designed to detect attacks and actually stop them. And about 6 months into, or 6 months after the deployment, the Cisco system shut down our entire environment and like booted out 2,500 users. And we're like, oh
no
my
way.
God, it was a nightmare, right? Phones were lighting up, like email was going crazy. And we realized the system was under attack. We didn't know its extent at the time. So we took it offline for a few hours. And then we realized, okay, like the technology works. Like no one got into the system and we spun it back up. And then I ended up calling the FBI out of New York City and I get the agent on the phone and he starts chatting. He's like, I got to be totally honest with you. I was like, what? He's like, so we just learned about this and this is going to be our first case. I'm like, okay, I guess we're going to learn together, aren't we? So they sent a bunch of agents up. And, we started chatting with them and our engineer was actually able to reverse the attack and find the IP address of the attacker. And a couple days later, the FBI arrested the guy out of Florida,
Oh, he was in US.
He was in the US, which is, as you know, right, is extremely rare.
Really rare.
Yeah, very rare. And he actually spent 7 years in federal prison over it. So, like a win, a win for technology, a win for,
Totally.
law enforcement. And that was like my real wake up call. Like, this is no freaking joke. Like, I mean, and this was before cyber was even a buzzword.
Right.
We're talking 25 years ago. And that was really my first intro into it. And actually, I just became obsessed with it, over the years. Ended up selling the company to a publicly traded company, worked for them for many years. And then around 2017, we had just very large clients, of all specialties reaching out to me and be like, hey, we've been down for 2 weeks. Like, we're fully encrypted with ransomware. We can't even treat patients. You have to help. I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, we don't do that as a company. And then one of our highest value clients called me. He's like, listen, you need to figure something out. So I called a couple friends from Wall Street. I'm like, hey guys, you know how to deal with ransomware? And one of my buddies was like, I do. I'm like, okay, you're flying with me down to the South and we're going to go bring this practice back online. And in a couple days, we negotiated with the hackers. We got the keys to unlock all of the encrypted data. We brought the systems back online and the doctor's like, you have to do something. You have to start a business to help people like myself. And I was like, that was great. I love this. Let's do it. And that was the year how Black Talon started.
Yeah, that's amazing. What year was that?
2017 into 2018.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Yeah, and it's funny because I feel so old when I say something like this, but I mean, obviously we're not old, but I just feel it when I say something silly like this. But when I first started the law firm, and we used to get people who'd be like, oh, someone broke into my office and, they took some charts and that was like the threat, right? Or they broke into my office and then it was, they took my server, right? Or, for a long time, IT professionals were saying, back up your server on these like portable drives and take it home with you. Well, people would leave it in their cars and then their cars would get broken into, or, or something like that would happen. And we dealt with a lot of that.
Yeah.
And then the world changed, right? Like you said, everybody went on the cloud. And then now it was like these cyber attacks. And as you know, I mean, I know you're not just in dental, you're in all of healthcare, optometry, ophthalmology, vet, medical, you're in all of this because there's not one specialty that this is targeted for. Everyone's under attack. As long as you have any sort of database online, or you're hooked into the internet in any way, which we all are, of course, you're potentially a target. But what I hear frequently, Gary, and I want you to address this because I think for our audience that's listening, they might still think they're too small, right, to be attacked. And I've heard doctors say to me, "Oh, I only have 1,000 patients. I have 700 patients. I'm small potatoes. I'm not this big company." But do you hear that a lot? Do you have clients that are attacked that are kind of just onesies and twosies, if you will?
Yeah. I mean, all the time, it's a numbers game for the hackers. And look, I think a lot of these attacks that impact small healthcare organizations, let's say a small dental practice, a small plastic surgeon, a vet, right? Doesn't matter. Yeah. A lot of times it's not a targeted attack. The hackers aren't saying, I want to hit, Dr. Mary Smith, a plastic surgeon in San Francisco.
Right.
Right. What they do is they scan the internet. They look for vulnerabilities on firewalls, computer servers, and then the hackers take little tools out of their toolkit and exploit those vulnerabilities and break in. And they have no idea what they're breaking into. They're like, "Oh, this looks like a cool building. Let me just break into it and see what's inside."
Right.
Yeah. Right. And maybe I'll find a pot of gold. And then they hit a healthcare organization like, boom, I hit the pot of gold. Right. They know right away. You can't make this stuff up. I literally have hackers that when I negotiate with them, they quote the HIPAA laws. They like, you have regulatory laws in your state. You have HIPAA laws. Like this is not for them. It's not a game, right? They want to get paid, and they will go to unbelievable extremes to make sure that they're paid for their efforts.
Of course. Yeah.
And it's, it's really sad, but yes, to answer your question directly, there are thousands of small practices that are hit. I think some of the larger groups and organizations, yes, there are very targeted attacks against them.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you just get caught in the middle of it, right? We're seeing right now, here's a great example. We just did an incident response for an email breach, which is a little different than ransomware, but it started with an oral surgeon who had his email compromised. They then used his real email account to send emails to his referrals and colleagues and business associates. And then those people started opening the emails, clicking on the links that came from his real account, and they got attacked. So those, that was kind of, for lack of a better phrase, friendly fire, because they were getting email from a legitimate source from a real email account. So sometimes, these things happen in very different ways than most people expect them to. But I also argue sometimes, like, if someone gets into your email and you've been in practice or business for a long time, that's sometimes worse than ransomware. Like, there's stuff in email. Like, I tell every doctor, what if I got every single one of your emails right now? What's in your email system that could put you in legal jeopardy? And everyone's like, that's not going to be good. So
yeah, and an email about going to a Coldplay concert, like you don't want any of that.
and videos, of course,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You don't want to email to your HR rep saying, "Hey, you want to go?"
Oh my God, this is gonna have legs for months.
Yeah. But the stories. I mean, I've heard you speak. You've spoken at our conference at HR for Health. I think you're coming out again this year in Salt Lake City. That one story you talk about, I talk about it all the time when I'm talking about your company. It was the one where you said the hacker had hacked into, I think it was a plastic surgeon's office, and then they were sending emails to the patients, basically saying, we've got your nude photos or your pre-op photos or post-op photos, and we will put it out on the internet, or we'll send it out if you don't pay us. So it wasn't even like the doctor that they were going after, although I think you said that they were also asking from ransom from that person, but they were going after the actual patients themselves. So because they, obviously people don't want their pictures if they're getting, whatever, done, to their bodies out on the internet. I mean, that is a level of sophistication that I think a lot of our clients don't ever even imagine could happen to them, right? And these stories are, I mean, that's just one that you tell. I mean, you tell so many of these stories. And so I think this is why I wanted you on the podcast. I want to kind of get into some of the nitty-gritty, because the real, I think people confuse what you do at Black Talon and on the cybersecurity with what their IT companies do.
Right.
Gary, right? And I think there's a lot of great companies that do infrastructure and IT, and then there's what you do, right? And so can you please explain in as simple language as you can, kind of what the difference is for our, to our audience of what you're doing and where you're sitting in this sort of platform, and sort of what the IT folks are doing, because I think there's some confusion there, and then we can get into some of the nitty gritty stuff.
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and a lot of folks that we talk to always say, right, my IT company does cybersecurity, and then I'll say, okay, that's great. What does that actually mean to you?
Right.
And then it's crickets. So like, I don't know. They put in a firewall and some antivirus software. So I see something blinking on my screen and they tell me I'm good. I think if we take a healthcare analogy, would probably be the best way to do it. Look, you can have a heart condition. You're going to go to your cardiologist. The cardiologist is going to diagnose you, but she's not going to bring you to the next room and split your chest and do, a valve transplant, right? That's not what they do. You're going to go to a cardiothoracic surgeon for that. And I think in the IT world, there's this huge misunderstanding in terms of what IT does and their capabilities and what cybersecurity companies do. It's very much analogous to what I just described. Mm-hmm. You have to have, to your point, a really good IT company, right? And some people call them managed service providers, to keep your practice, your business up and running and fix things and upgrade your technology. But just like cardiologist versus cardiothoracic surgeon, right? We specialize in cyber. So, in terms of our engineers' credentials, the tools we use, the techniques, the fact that we're immersed in this and doing it literally 24/7, right? We're a 24/7 shop. We don't really sleep per se. Mm-hmm. And we're analyzing and investigating these threats sometimes multiple times per week, for victims of these events, really helps us truly understand what the actual threat is, how they're occurring, and putting controls in place to prevent them. So, I mean, if you look at typically what we see in most small and even I'll say small, medium-sized healthcare organizations, they have the bare essentials from a cybersecurity perspective, right? They have some antivirus software and they have a firewall. So the big problem I see in almost every case that we investigate of a ransomware attack or data theft, which is really the norm now, something on the network was misconfigured, right? So the IT company misconfigured the firewall. You had this $1,000, firewall, and it wasn't configured properly because someone opened up ports. And so it's like, hey, you got this, $1,000 deadbolt on your house, but you walked out of your house and you didn't flip the deadbolt. So criminal came by and just kicked your door and it popped right open, right? So we have enterprise level tools and technology that tests those firewalls on a daily basis to see if they're susceptible to a cyber attack. On the inside of the network, if a hacker lands on a computer, right? Someone clicks on a link, opens an attachment, someone visits a website that they shouldn't be on, something is exposed to the outside world through the firewall, the hacker will get on the network and they will actually run similar tools that we use called vulnerability scanners. And these vulnerability scanners will look for defects in operating systems, software like Google, Chrome, Adobe, you name it, Microsoft operating system vulnerabilities. And then once again, their toolkit basically says, oh, I've identified this vulnerability, use this tool, and the server won't ask you for a username and password.
Oh, geez.
Right.
Wow.
And then we see a lot of networks compromised, and they're like, well, how'd they get in? They didn't have her password. I'm like, they didn't need the password. They ran
Yeah.
an exploitation against a vulnerability, and the server just choked. Right. And it's like, come on in. Ollie, I don't need your password. You're good. So.
And on top of that, I think people don't realize that all their passwords, especially when they save them, are actually sitting on their devices. I had my nephew, he was working for us for a period of time doing some project management stuff. And I remember he needed to get into a piece of software that we had on my computer. I was traveling. Gary, he went into my computer. I mean, it was fine because I asked him to do it. He went into my computer, found the username, found the password, on the file, logged in. I mean, it was as if like there was no password. It was as if I had written the password on a sticky note and put it on my monitor. It was that easy for him. And he's not some tech genius. He just, like you said, knows how to maneuver. And so
that's right.
Hackers that are sitting in foreign countries, when they get access, and they know how to do this
they're experts.
Minutes.
Yeah, look, I think most practice owners and business leaders don't understand who we're up against, right? This is not some kid sitting in their basement of mom's house attacking you. These are sometimes multi-billion-dollar ransomware groups that have access to the best coders, the best developers, the best technology. They resell their services to other hackers. You're up against technology that you're not going to be able to defend against using traditional methodologies that IT companies are using. That's just a fact. I mean, that's how it works. Yeah.
Yeah. And for everyone who's listening, one thing that, and another example, and this is again, like sort of an old school example, but I think when you said that a lot of times the IT companies come in, they set things up and they're not necessarily configured properly.
Right.
A lot of our clients will resonate with that because back in the day when there used to be just backups of databases, people would come in and set up, backups and not configure it properly where things were not actually backed up to the secondary server. And then when something happened, they would go to try to retrieve it and things weren't backed up. So it's basically, you're like a second opinion on the security of an office. You're coming in and doing, pressure testing of the systems that are in place. And if they're all vulnerabilities, you'll close those vulnerabilities and try to minimize the impact of somebody getting in either on the front side or from the inside, like you said. And so,
look, I think you have a really good point here, which is that what we do is constantly test these devices, looking for these exposures, right? It's called vulnerability testing. And then there's a next level up called penetration testing where, our ethical hackers, our team members will try and break into the network and expose it at a higher level. I think that's really important. Then you have the human element, right? You have a doctor, you have, Dave or Stacy at the front desk clicking on things, right? So you address that through training and simulated phishing. So there's lots of methodologies, but look, a lot of attorneys, data privacy attorneys, are now really recommending to their clients that you segregate or separate IT from security. Because, and I'll challenge everyone on this call because I do this on the live audiences all the time. What I always say is, has your IT company ever sat down with you and said, hey, Dr. Smith, here are all the security problems with the network we built for you?
Yeah, of course not.
I get one hand out of hundreds of hands, right? When I'm live on stage. And that has to be the wake up call, right? If you've never had that conversation, you're not getting what you think. And look, you brought up something really interesting, which is the backups. Like back in the day before there was cyber, hard drives failed on servers all the time, fire, flood, right? Theft.
Yep.
And you hope that backup worked. But how many times they go to restore the data and like, oh crap, I forgot you guys switched to a new practice management software. We were still backing up the old database.
Yeah.
We don't have your new database. We just finished up a ransomware event with a 4-location dental group, and they went to restore all of their digital radiography. Never tagged for backup. So now they're taking a massive loss on tens of thousands of digital radiographs.
Which is crazy. I mean, it's millions of dollars worth of value. And and also loss of goodwill with patients and things. So it's a big deal. Yeah, no, it's a big deal. So Gary, let's walk through this. You've got IT, you've got you, right? Humans are human, right? And IT, I'm sure, is threatened a little bit by you guys, because I've had discussions with IT companies on behalf of clients. My wife's own IT folks that we've got to get you guys involved with, and they're all like, no, you're protected, you're fine. They get very territorial,
Right.
right? So how do you recommend for a doctor to have this conversation with them? Or is it, have the conversation with you about what's going on, and you can do things independent of them? Like walk us through that side of it, because a lot of doctors are like, yeah, I know I need it. It's something I need to invest in, but I don't even know what that first step is. So,
Yeah. So I think you can approach it a couple different ways. What I always tell everyone is your IT company should want what's best for you and the best level of protection. If that's bringing in a third party company that specializes in this, why would they have a problem with it? Right. And unfortunately, what I have seen way too many times is the promises made, the assumption from the doctors that these things are being done. We come in and unfortunately they've been paying for something that they don't have. And I think when you have really hard pushback from the IT vendors as a doctor and owner, you need to sit back and be like, what's going on here? What, right. Why? The way I always like to approach it is from a positive perspective, which is, hey, this is a three-legged stool. And the three of us, Black Talon, IT resources, and the practice, we're all going to work together to protect this patient data and protect the operation of the practice. And if we all agree on that, we're going to have a great relationship. And I think that the doctors have to realize, and you've heard the stories numerous times, this is sometimes career ending. I have seen dental practice and medical groups just go out of business.
100%.
Literally they can't survive. And it's easy to just say, well, I asked the right question of my IT resources. I heard what I wanted to hear, so I'm going to move on and do something else. Got to stop thinking that way, right? Because
I totally agree. Yeah.
So I think that's a great way to approach. We typically do need the buy-in from the IT company because there are things that we're going to detect on the network that they're going to need to fix. We can fix about 70% of the security issues, but there are things that they're going to need to put, their hands on keyboard and fix on our behalf,
and do it,
especially with firewalls and things like that. So there should be some buy-in. We also find that a lot of the IT companies end up loving the relationship because they're like, oh, we're actually learning stuff we didn't know about, and then they bring in other clients to us and say, hey, you did a good job, with Dr. O's practice, can you, work with these practices or medical groups too. So yeah, look, it's definitely a challenge, but I say the same thing that I say to everyone. It's like, do you want a specialist to do orthognathic surgery on your face, or do you want a generalist? And it's, right. I think it's very applicable. There's a lot. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought. Yeah.
The challenge in the IT space, and I see it going to conferences all the time, is there is the Kool-Aid drinking that goes on, right? So a vendor gets up on stage. We have the best antivirus software in the world, right? And it's unbeatable, whatever they say, right? And then the IT company gets it. They install it. They don't manage it properly. They don't configure it properly. They turn the dial down on the technology because they don't want to be bothered by their clients. And then they have a ransomware, so anyway.
Yeah. So I want to shift a little bit to the actual, security pitfalls, if you will, the holes that you see, because, from an HR perspective, like at HR for Health, what we've noticed is that whether someone has one location or they have, 20, 30, 40 locations, the problems are actually the same.
Right.
And they're the same actually across all, verticals too, whether you're an optometrist, a, ophthalmologist, a veterinarian, a dentist, a physician, the same HR kind of problems exist. Again, whether they're huge or they're small, because a lot of times they're not focusing on the right things. Is there one common thing, or are there common traits that you see across all practices that you deal with that are a threat, that are security holes that that you can sort of talk about now?
So yes, and I think this actually applies to any industry, yeah, outside of healthcare. So
Yeah.
the first one is visibility, right? So it goes kind of back to what I said originally, which is if you ask the doctor, like, "Hey, what are you doing for security? Are you secure?" The answer is, "I don't know. I assume so."
Yeah.
So one of the best things that we do for our clients is give them clear visibility and transparency into every device, every firewall, and every person in their organization, and assign a risk score to them. So they can look at the firewall and being completely non-technical, they're like, why the heck is my firewall not configured? Black Talon's flagging it as being a high risk, right? And then they can take action. Well, I have 30 employees and 25 of them haven't trained on cybersecurity. So those people are high risk, and I can go and address that. I don't need to be technical. I can see right on the screen that they didn't train.
Right.
I have computers that are running out of date operating systems, obsolete or end of life operating systems, as we call it. I can press one button and it shows me every machine that's not compliant because it's not receiving security patches. So having all of this visibility into your environment in a non-technical way, and then using charts and graphs and KPIs, right? All the fun business, acronyms. You get to then make decisions for your practice or your business, right? Because what often happens is there's just no visibility. I mean, we've done numerous ransomware attacks where the firewall license expired. It wasn't getting new security updates from the firewall manufacturer because they didn't pay the bill. And a platform like ours would instantly identify that and say, "Hey, are you aware that your license expired?" And a lot of times, like, "Oh my God, I had no idea. I thought someone paid that bill."
Sure.
Right? That little piece of knowledge can save you seven figures.
Yeah.
And the IT companies just typically are not, doing that type of thing, or they are managing and it gets mismanaged. That's why it's just nice to have a second set of eyes. So I think visibility is paramount, right? For any organization. Hey, how well is my firewall configured? How well are my servers and workstations configured? What risk do I have? That can all be presented graphically in charts and graphs. Then from a risk scale, it's your people, right? Going back to what we said before, you have to train them, right? If you're in a regulated industry for healthcare, you are required under federal law, under HIPAA, to train your doctors and staff on cyber threats. It's not optional, right? And when we do these investigations with law firms and the victims, and then the Office for Civil Rights gets involved from all the HIPAA police, right? One of the very first things that OCR will ask for is proof of training. Like, show us everything you were doing prior to the event to validate that, you were actually trying to comply with the regs. And many practices will be like, I had no idea I had to do that. Everyone knows about OSHA and things like that. And your world, HR, they have a general understanding and they hire professionals like you guys. But most people, when it comes to cyber, just have no idea. It's nothing they're teaching in dental school or medical school, right? Or often in business school. So, addressing the people risk is really, really important. And then understanding the technology that's out there to protect you. I mean, there is like some amazing technology out there that has to be configured and managed properly for it to be effective. But in the last year, we are now heavily leveraging AI, right? You got to put $5 in the jar now. I said AI, but
exactly.
leveraging AI to intercept malicious emails. So we have a platform that reads the emails. It determines if the email has malicious intent. It looks at the attachments. It looks at the links. And within a fraction of a second, it can rip that email out of an inbox. And, the person never even sees it, right? It's intercepted.
That's amazing. Yeah.
It also works off of crowdsourcing. So for argument's sake, right, we have 10,000 inboxes that we manage for clients. And let's just say you use it and you get an email and you're like, hey, this looks horrible. Like the AI missed it because it's never 100%. And you flag it and you're like, hey, Black Talon, I think you guys need to look at this email. I think it's malicious. And our security engineer is like, oh yeah, Ollie's right. Like this is malicious. We'll flag it. And then it will instantly query 10,000 of our clients' mailboxes to see if there's a similar message. And if it
Oh,
finds it, it'll rip it out. So
nice.
you are a network defender. We have 10,000 network defenders, like
Yeah.
crowdsourcing. Very, very cool technology. And something like that costs you a couple dollars per mailbox per month, that could literally save you, like I said, 6 or 7 figures. Like, why wouldn't you invest in that?
Yeah. I have a good friend who received an email from basically his CPA that asked him to, send some funds in for a retirement account. And it was something that, wasn't out of the norm because they were doing these kinds of communications over the course of the year, for the past many years. So he didn't think anything of it. And they sent him the email. He's like, the only thing that was kind of weird was that usually we have a meeting before doing all of it, but I think he thought that they were just skipping that step, sent him like, routing numbers and all of this kind of stuff. And he just transferred, like, I think it was like $20,000
Right.
to it, and then didn't hear back, contacted the company like 2-3 weeks later and was like, hey, Mr. CPA, like, what happened? Where did you guys put this? And so on. And the CPA was like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Huge
Like,
problem.
and it was, he went back and looked at the email. It came from their email. Like, it wasn't like a hidden email address, whatever. It actually came from their email, but somehow got, hijacked or whatever. And I mean, he ended up getting his money back because, they're a CPA firm. They've got liability insurance and so on and so forth. But it's just so easy and so common for people to get into systems now.
Yeah, look,
So the way you're describing.
people are too trusting. That's the unfortunate thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the email address, you look at the name, you recognize it. It's my friend, it's my CPA, it's my attorney, it's my HR consultant. Why would they send me something malicious? I'm going to click on it.
Yeah.
I'm going to open it.
Yeah.
I'm going to do something.
Right.
And your brain goes to a different state. Like you drop your guard versus an email. You're like, who's this person? What the hell are they asking for? No way. I'm not, this is a scam. And it comes down to what I always talk about is mindset. And unfortunately, like, we're all running a million miles an hour. It's very easy to be like, I got to get through my emails. I got to do this, got to do that. And the next thing you know, you're like, oh, I thought this only happens to other people. I never thought this was going to happen to me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It will never happen to me. Yeah. Yeah. That's the biggest thing. And we hear that on the HR side too. And it's funny you're saying this about HR, about how people are becoming more knowledgeable about HR and HIPAA and OSHA. But 20 years ago, when I first started, and I guess 13 years ago when I started HR for Health, we were in the same boat, Gary, right? Like, because they don't talk about HR compliance in the school. Nobody understood it. No one cared about it. People just kind of took it for granted.
Right.
And then they were getting sued by employees and whatnot. And we, through a lot of work, like, of educating the doctors through all these lectures and seminars and all this stuff, we finally have gotten to a place where people are like, you know what? HR is a real thing. Like, it's a real threat. It's no longer, oh, it happens to someone else.
Right.
It's always like, oh, you know what? It could happen to me, right?
Yeah.
It could happen to me. And I feel like with cybersecurity, we're still in that early infancy stage where people hear about large companies, getting hacked,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't think it's going to ever be them until, unfortunately, it's too late, So,
yeah. I mean, it's funny. I look back, like, I was 25 years old with my first company. I had 50 employees. I don't even know if I knew what HR was. It's just it's just like, it all kind of worked, right? And the only HR issue I ever had was I had a secretary who fell in my office, and the next thing I know is I get served with some lawsuit, and like that she,
Or you should have kicked her, Gary. That's probably why you got sued. No, just kidding.
Yeah, she was the nicest lady ever. She definitely was amazing. But yeah, it's just like, and then fast forward to what we know now, we're like, what the hell were we even thinking back then? You just didn't know. I mean, I think it's, I'd never thought of it in those terms. Like, hey, we're just 20 years off, literally.
So let's talk about investment for a second, because, everyone's asking doctors to pay for things, right? And so I know for some of our audience, they're probably thinking, all right, well, how much do I need to budget for cybersecurity? What does like this kind of real protection cost? Obviously, I know it could run the whole gamut depending on what systems they already have and how much of a threat they are. But just as a range, if you can give a range, like if they're thinking about budgeting for this and they need to kind of get going with contacting you and all that, what should they be thinking about budgetary?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely lots of variables there, but let's start with a small practice, right?
Yeah.
Like a small practice, even just say a single doctor with a dozen computers.
Yeah.
A really strong, but maybe not fully complete cyber solution, 300 bucks per month.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to add, some of the AI technology with antivirus and the AI with email, it's going to add a couple more dollars per computer, per month. But if you're multi-location, it might be $700-800 per month for 2 locations, somewhere around there. It really depends, to your point, like what do they currently have in place? What can they actually get rid of and replace with our technology? So a lot of times there is that offset. They're already paying for something. It may not be great. So get rid of that, put the money towards more, tier 1 tools.
Yep.
The tools we use, literally, I tell people this all the time. You're going to find our tools in Fortune 100 companies, multi-billion-dollar companies. Like we're using these tools in high 6-figure practices and above. We service some of the largest DSOs in the country, and obviously that's a whole different ball game.
A whole different game. Yeah.
Yeah. But that, I mean, I think a $300 starting point. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. That's super manageable, and it's like I talk about with HR as well. It's the cheapest insurance you can get to pay $200-300 a month for this protection. I mean, it's some of the cheapest insurance, and it's the peace of mind too that I think is such a vital part of it, right? Because the peace of mind of knowing, look, no one's ever 100% safe in anything, but their risk profile is super low. We talk about that on the HR side. It's like, do you have a high risk profile? Do you have a low risk profile? I think we all want to have a low risk profile so that, we fly under the radar. So, okay. All right. That sounds great. So, all right, let's go to some questions we got. This is the Ask Ali segment. So we went to our clients and audience, and we asked them to send us questions in anticipation of today. So, so here are some real questions from doctors that are, have small or larger practices, and they'd love to get your answers to these questions, Gary. So you ready for these?
Let's go.
All right. So the first question is, hey, Gary, our practice recently noticed some unusual activity on our patient management system. Some files appear to have been accessed outside the normal hours, but nothing seems missing or corrupted yet. We haven't experienced any obvious breaches. There's a typo there, but it makes me nervous. What's the best way to investigate this without disrupting day-to-day operations? How do I know if we're at risk of something bigger?
So I think there's one variable that we would have to just discuss. Like, is it a cloud-based system? Is it on-prem? Meaning the doctor has his or her own server. So the first thing is I would definitely look deeper into the log file. So most practice management systems have decent logging. So it should say the date, the time, and the user that logged in. So step one for me, if I was investigating this, I would go to that person and be like, hey, Stacy, I saw you logged in at 2:30 a.m. On a Saturday night. Was that you? And she's like, oh, yeah, doctor, I had some work I had to do from home and I logged in and that was me. Oh, okay, that's an acceptable response. Sure. Or you go to Stacy and be like, hey, did you log in? She's like, doc, come on. I don't work from home, right? So I don't even have access. We potentially have a bigger problem. Is the problem someone else is using her username and password? Maybe a threat actor, maybe what's called an insider threat, which is pretty rare in dental, like another employee causing problems from that perspective. Has a threat actor gained access to the network remotely? And often what I see is the threat actors almost always work after hours because they don't want someone seeing, the screen moving, right? The mouse moving around on the screen because they've remoted in, them opening and closing windows. So for me, with the second I see after hours access to a system outside their normal business operations, and that's not normal behavior for anyone in the practice, it's a huge red flag, right? So from an investigative standpoint, like a tool sets that we use would be able to potentially identify access to the network that is inappropriate. And then from there, we need to figure it out. Like, hey, did they break in through the VPN, the virtual private network? Did someone turn on remote tools to remote into the systems. Like these are all things we'd have to dig into. But for the doctor that asked that question, that is high on my radar from a risk perspective. Like that definitely needs to be investigated. You can't just ignore that because these attacks often evolve over weeks. And sometimes it's just a little bit of smoke, right? It's in almost every case, Ali, someone's like, well, I saw this 2 weeks ago. And we're like, that was the beginning of it. If you had just said something back then, we wouldn't be dealing with a, $500,000 ransomware event.
Yeah. That old, adage of like, if there's smoke, there's fire.
Yep.
People ignore that. And we say the same thing on the HR side. We're like, look, your intuition is the culmination of your entire life experience, right? And so if something feels off or something doesn't seem right with, your employees, your, practice data, your security, something just raise your hand and ask for help because there may be something in there. Hopefully it's nothing, but sometimes it's something. And if it's something, you can, the sooner you deal with it, the better, right? And
absolutely agree. Yeah.
Gary, are you able to track someone's IP address? Like, can you navigate backwards? Like if someone's like accessing some files, like in this doctor's question from a vacation spot in Florida, right? Let's say it's the office manager. Can you like figure that out? Are you able to work backwards or is that too sophisticated?
No, I mean, we can definitely do that. If it is truly coming from a threat actor, they will do what's called obfuscation, which basically means they hide their location, right? They operate out of Russia and it looks like they're operating out of Dallas, Texas or Switzerland. So when they're using this infrastructure to mask their location, it's basically impossible, right? Even for certain federal agencies to figure that out. So it depends on what's happening. There's sophistication. Sometimes they just screw up if they're a bad actor. But it's also good, right? If you can trace the IP and it comes back to your point, like, hey, we know Stacy was down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and there's an IP. Okay, Stace, did you log in? That was me. I was doing work from the hotel room.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, we got another one. It says, hey, Gary, we just got an email from what looks like one of our vendors asking for payment details in a way that seems a little off. It's not a known scam, but something feels off about it. I'm not sure if this is a phishing attempt or a legitimate request. What steps should I take to verify the authenticity without causing alarm or delaying important payments? And, I think this question is coming because of what happened to that large Fortune 1000 company that we won't name that, got hacked in dental, right? And I think people were so shocked that a company like that could get hacked and how it impacted everything that they did, from their, ability to deliver goods to billing to all of that, now that, small vendors are asking, which kind of seems like what this person's asking, people's risks, alarms are growing up.
Accounts payable fraud is a real problem. Multi-billion-dollar problem, actually, between wire fraud and accounts payable. So typically the attack is exactly like this person describes. I don't know if it's real or not. Obviously, I don't have enough information. But it typically starts with an invoice that comes to you. And it can happen in a couple different ways. It could look like the actual invoice from that vendor or supplier. Mm-hmm. And down at the bottom, often we see it'll say, hey, we've changed our payment terms. We're only now accepting ACH. We're not accepting checks anymore. Here's our routing number, the ABA number, and here's our checking account number. Please make all payments.
Yeah.
And so the accounts payable person is like, oh, this is even better. I don't have to write checks. So they go into their, chase.com, set up the ACH. There goes $19,000 gone. And then a week later, the real vendor's like, hey, you guys are 30 days past due. And accounts payable is like, oh, no, I paid that 2 weeks ago. And they're like, we never got it. And then they start tracing. And they're like, oh, man, we got caught. So, and you're usually not going to get that money back very easily.
No.
So what I always say is the second your payment terms change, you make a phone call. You call the actual phone number, go to the website. Don't take the phone number off the invoice because they're going to change that too. So the hacker actually answers the phone, thank you for calling ABC Dental Supply or Medical Supply. How can I help you? Oh yeah, no, that's right. We just changed everything. You can go ahead and pay that. Oh, okay, thank you. Boom, and they send the money. So they're sophisticated. This is what they do. So always do the we'll call it like multi-factor authentication, right? Make that phone call and confirm that. Here's a pro tip. Anytime you're doing a wire transfer, right? Maybe you're buying a practice, maybe you're buying a large amount of equipment, real estate. What I always do is I say, wire $1. So, right, get all the wiring information, send $1, pick up the phone and be like, hey, Dave, just sent you $1. Can you look at your bank account, confirm you got it? Okay, let me log in. Oh, yep, I see the $1 here. Okay, I'm going to send you $999,999 now, right? And
Yeah.
that's a really good way of just verifying not only that it's not malicious, but sometimes you just type the wrong number.
Yeah. That's a great point. I love that. That's a great pro tip and something that I think everybody should do with anything having to do with wiring, right? With absolutely anything having to do with wiring. And as you were telling that story, I just remembered something that happened to my wife. Actually, she got an email from a vendor that she buys from, like a large retail vendor, and the email said something to the effect of, "Hey, we saw a credit card being opened, under your name, and we just need to verify details." Right, and she called the number, right, that was on that email, and started talking to them about it, and they were like, "Well, we think this is fraud, and we think this was open." And she's like, "Yeah, I didn't open this credit card." And so then they started, well, to prove that this was fraud and that these charges, we need you to check this out, Gary. They said, your social security card, your tax returns, and there was one other thing, and a copy of your driver's license.
Yeah.
And it was like, and she's like, "What are you talking about? I'm not doing that." And then she got off the phone with them. And I told her, I was like, obviously, thank you for being smart enough.
Yeah, seriously, right.
But
let's start there.
But yeah, exactly. Let's start there. But
Yeah.
this is what happens. And she was like, "Dude, the email was from this vendor. I mean, this was their number, and so on and so forth." And the funny thing is about that is I never followed up, but even if it's one digit off, right, in the phone number, they can mask a lot of this stuff. And so it's pretty crazy how sophisticated they can get. And what's funny to me, Gary, is that everybody who hears these stories says, "Oh man, that's so silly. Of course this is fraud."
Yeah.
Right? Because everyone's doing the Monday morning quarterbacking, but in real time, you're distracted, you're scared because you see charges coming, you see emails coming, you see this, people get kind of freaked out by different things, and then they let their guard down, like you said, and then they make a mistake.
A new spin on this, which we're seeing firsthand, not only at our company, but for our clients, is they will leverage social media platforms like LinkedIn, right? So they go to the company they want to target, they'll see who the key executives are in the company. They'll try and figure out who a COO is or CFO or whoever.
Yeah.
And they'll create a lookalike email address. So they'll create an email that looks just like Gary Salman, and then they'll send it to the person doing accounts payable, and it'll say, "Hey, Susie, just want to let you know, can you go ahead and please pay this bill?" And Susie looks at it, says Gary Salman, CEO, and she pays the bill. And then, a week later, she's like, "Hey, I just want to let you know I paid that." I'm like, talking about, right? Pay what?
Yeah.
I didn't send you anything to pay. So I think people have to be smart, about that they're going to leverage people's names that are familiar to you to get you to pay bills. So look, it's a scam. That's the reality.
It's a scam. It's a scam.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to end on this before we go to the last section. I want to end on this topic because I think there's a lot of misinformation about this. And so I want to get your thoughts on it. There's a lot of people who have emails that are sent with their information to others that are clearly not sent by the person, right? So for example, like, I'll get an email from someone with their name, and maybe it's their domain or whatnot, but it's not really coming from them. It's coming from someone else, and it'll use my name. So there will be components of it that seem real,
Right.
but it's clearly not real. Is that person who they're imitating, do they, if someone's doing that, does that mean that they have somehow been hacked, and they somehow, their database, their Rolodex has been hacked?
Right.
They kind of know certain things, and that's why they're imitating them, or is it something else, and they don't need to necessarily worry as much about it? I don't know if I asked that question.
No, I'm tracking what you're asking. So I'll say it's 50-50, right? Hackers will do what's called email spoofing, which, I'll get an email, and kind of in the header of the email, it says your name, right?
Yeah.
And it may even say your real domain name after your name. But they've manipulated the email client so it just presents that way. And then when you dig a little deeper, you realize that email is not actually coming from your domain. Someone's just making it look like it. And for the average person who doesn't know how to look at the email header and analyze it real quickly, they could fall for it. The flip side is kind of the scenarios you and I have talked about, where your email actually gets hacked, and the hacker has full control of your email, and they are actually you, and they're sending emails from your account. That's a bad situation, right?
Yeah.
Because how long does it take you to know? They're typically going to download all of your emails, and then, kind of like we talked about before, people who receive the emails from the real email account may fall victim because they lower their guard.
Yeah.
So look, we get a lot of phone calls from people saying, "Oh, my email was hacked. My email was hacked." And we're like, "Well, how do you know that?" And they're like, "Well, people are saying they're getting emails from me." And then we start investigating, like, it's not really coming from your email address. It looks like it is, but it's not. And look, that's the best case scenario.
This is part of your analysis, right?
Yeah,
like, this is part of your analysis that you're doing as well, right? When you come into a practice, you're looking at all these potential threats, I assume, right? And so if there's vulnerabilities, you'll tell them. So
yeah, it's called attack surface, right? You have your external attack surface, which is anything connected to the internet. You have internal attack surface, which are kind of computers, people. You have cloud technologies, you have email, you have, all of these third parties you interact with. So it's a lot bigger than I think even small practices realize. Like their patient data is not in one database.
Is not one database.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the last section, which is the one that you're going to be on the hot seat, right? We call that plead the fifth, right? We call that plead the fifth. So in this portion I'm going to ask you a spicy question, and it might be a little uncomfortable, but that's the whole point.
Okay.
And you have two options. You can either answer honestly, or you can plead the fifth, and no one has yet, pled the fifth. So no pressure, but I'm just
here. I get it. Meanwhile, later you're going to tell me 50% of the people plead the fifth, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So here's the question, right? Here's the question. There are a lot of companies out there that, pretend to be, for example, AI companies, right? And they throw that word out there, but they just have, 50 people in the Philippines, answering phones and doing coding and stuff, right? Or they'll say they're doing things, artificially, but it's really just humans, somewhere, doing something. So it's not real. There's a lot of companies that are selling their services to our doctors, right? And some are startups, some are more established companies like yours and mine, at HR for Health. What are the questions, Gary, that a doctor should ask of a vendor when they're thinking about, their security, right? And right now, I want you to focus on practice management software because there's a lot of softwares across a lot of different things, of course, but with regard to just practice management softwares, because there's a lot of movement there, people are coming and going and whatnot. What should a doctor ask their vendor in terms of security to make sure that the software company is at least doing the minimal stuff that they need to do at their level, not at the practice level, of course, but at their level?
AI is the Wild West right now. from a technology perspective, from a security, compliance, regulatory, it is all over the place. And, you go to I just came back from a show in Arizona, and I would say 60% of the booths had AI stamped on their booths.
Of
And,
course.
and I was like, Jesus, this went from like 10% a year ago. So,
Right.
so it's growing at a dramatic rate. And I believe that there are two buckets of vendors. Well, we'll say three buckets. Ones that are just stamping the word AI and they're just using traditional coding, not even really AI to analyze the data. Then I think you have the companies that are leveraging some AI and the large language models, say ChatGPT, Gemini, like all of these. And they really don't know exactly what's happening with the data, where it's going, who those companies are sharing the data with. And then there are some of these practice management companies that are very squared away. And when you say, hey, I need to really understand what you guys are doing from a security perspective, they can pull out all the documentation, right? And show you, hey, we're sharing this data, with Microsoft, and we have an agreement in place that they won't train their model with my data. They won't share that data with another company. Right. So I think doctors, to answer your question directly, doctors can ask a couple of really good questions. Now, understand that the company may require you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which is fine. Just sign it, as long as your attorney's cool with that. And ask a couple questions. One is, where is my data? Right. So if I said to you right now, ABC practice management software, when I enter data into my practice management system, where does the data go? They should be able to say, okay, well, it's stored in our cloud system, right? Or it's stored on your server. Then it goes to ChatGPT, and I'm just doing hypotheticals, right? Then it goes to ChatGPT for analysis, right? And then it comes back to you with a result. But then we take all of our data in the large language model and we back it up to AWS, Amazon Web Services, or Microsoft Azure, right? As just a redundancy. And then you can ask, are you using my data to enhance your AI? Are you using it to train your engine, right? And if the answer is yes, then say, okay, well, how are you anonymizing that? Because if you guys get breached and someone strips out all this data, and so a threat actor can see every single one of my patient records and all the questions I asked about that patient or that insurance claim or whatever, we're both going to have a problem here. So kind of like the who, the what, the why, and ask probing questions. Do you have a data map? Can you show me on the screen every single place, my patient record goes? And then the other question is, do you share my data with anyone, right? Are you maybe sharing it with, for argument's sake, an implant company, right? Or a drug company, right? And it's very possible that you're an attorney, you know this, when you clicked on the end user, like the EULA, the end user license agreement, you agreed to this, right? Regardless of whether or not that sales rep told you they were doing that or denied that they were doing that, you agreed to it in a legal contract. So, I think understanding who has access to your data, why they're accessing that type of data, where is it being stored, and what are you doing with it are all really critical questions. And a person who is selling AI should be able to rattle that off the tip of their tongue. And if they start staggering and like, oh, I need to look into this, and I don't know if we're willing to share that information, that's probably not the correct vendor for you, right? Because it's not worth the risk.
It's not worth the risk. Yeah,
right.
Those are great questions. Great question. Awesome. Wow, Gary, this has been amazing. What an eye-opening discussion. I hope and I know that the audience is going to take a lot away from this. Just knowing what risks actually exist and what they need to pay attention to. Can you tell us how they? I mean, we're going to put all your social media links and contact info in the description below, but what's another easy way for them to get up?
Yeah, blacktalonsecurity.com. My email is gary@blacktalonsecurity.com. I also suggest follow me on LinkedIn. I have probably about 6,000 doctors that follow me, and we constantly post really good tips, stuff about like what we're talking about now, things that someone can do personally to protect themselves. So definitely follow me on socials. And that's probably the best way.
That's perfect. Well, thank you. I mean, I appreciate you going into details about how real this threat is, what the actual costs could be to the doctors to recover it, to their impact of their practice from a goodwill perspective. You're right. So many people have had to close their practices down or modify what they're doing in such a significant way, because of this, and it's kind of start over, unfortunately. And because, when you lose the patient trust, it's gone, right? Like if they feel like it's, they can't even do you can't even maintain their health records, it becomes really, really kind of crazy. So I appreciate you spending some time and explaining how doctors can better proactively protect their practice, which is, I think, that's the clarity we all need. Well, everyone, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor and comment or subscribe to Ali Off the Record. And we are excited to bring you our next episode as well, as we have some real talk with industry experts. Until next time, I'm Ali Aramchin, and thanks for tuning in. Talk to you soon.